When I was in college, I desperately needed a job that wouldn't clash with my classes. I found one as a night security guard at this massive, mostly abandoned industrial warehouse complex way out on the edge of town. The company used it for archival storage, which meant endless rows of dusty boxes in these huge, cavernous halls with flickering fluorescent lights. My job was simple. Sit in a tiny guard booth at the main gate from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., do a couple of walking patrols, and write no activity in the logbook. I was completely alone out there, just me, the buzz of old lights, and the sound of what I really hoped were just rats scurrying in the dark. The silence was so thick you could hear your own watch ticking. My only human contact was Frank, the old, tired guard I relieved each night, and Linda, the woman who took over in the morning. Linda never really spoke, but Frank, on my third night, he paused while handing me the keys. He looked at me and said, "If you hear anything odd, just stay in the booth. Don't go investigating. Cameras only cover the gates." I asked him what he meant, but he just shook his head. "Probably just kids," he muttered, or echoes. "This old place talks sometimes." Then he left. I just figured he was lonely and a bit weird. For the first few weeks, nothing happened. It was just boring silence. But then, one night around 2 in the morning, during my first patrol, I heard it. It wasn't a voice. It was this steady, rhythmic tapping sound, like someone knocking on metal with one knuckle. It seemed to be coming from deep inside Bay 3, the oldest part of the warehouse. I shined my flashlight down the aisle, but the beam barely cut through the darkness between the towering shelves. Following procedure, I yelled out, "Security, identify yourself." Immediately, the tapping stopped. I just stood there, my heart pounding in the sudden silence, and decided Frank's advice was pretty good. I went back to the booth and tried to convince myself it was just the building settling. But it happened again the next week, and the week after that. The tapping became this regular, unnerving part of my shift. Always from Bay 3, always around the same time. One night, a mix of boredom and creeping fear made me try something different. I didn't shout out. I just walked to the entrance of the bay, turned off my flashlight, and listened. The tapping was clearer this time. And then I heard something else in between the taps, a low, whispered muttering. I couldn't make out any words, just this frantic, hushed sound. Then the whispering stopped, and a man's voice, clear and totally calm, echoed down the aisle, 742. I didn't even think, I just ran. I didn't finish my patrol, just locked myself in the booth until dawn. The next morning, I finally broke down and asked Linda about it. When I told her what I heard, her face went completely white. "You heard him?" she whispered. "Frank never heard him. The guard before me did, though. He said the man isn't dangerous. He's just counting." She told me that years ago, a longtime inventory clerk worked the night shift alone in that bay. One night, he just vanished. The only thing they found was his logbook left open on his desk. But instead of inventory codes, it was just filled with page after page of handwritten numbers over and over. The police investigated but found nothing. "Some people say he's still in there," Linda said, looking away, still finishing the count. I quit the next week. On my very last night, I made sure to stay far away from Bay 3 during my patrol. But as I was walking past the far end of the corridor, I heard the muttering again, seeping through the concrete wall. It was faster this time, more urgent. Then, clear as day, the voice stated, 1000. A single final tap rang out, sharp like a period at the end of a sentence. And then, for the first time since I'd started working there, the entire warehouse fell into a true, absolute silence. Silence that felt heavy, like something was finally finished. I never found out what happened to that counting clerk. Sometimes, late at night, I still wonder what he was counting in the dark all those years, what it meant when he finally reached the end. My first job out of film school was a real test of endurance. I was on the night shift, digitizing old archival footage for a local historical society. The job was solitary, just me in a cramped, windowless basement room from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. I'd feed these old reels of film and beta tapes into the machines, cataloging whatever was on them. The archive was in this old, converted 19th century library, and my little lab was right below the old main reading room. At night, the place was completely empty. All you could hear were the groans of old pipes and the hum of my equipment. The pay was good, and honestly, the silence was a nice break after all the chaos of film school. The project I was on focused on a bunch of unlabeled tapes from the late 70s and early 80s. City council meetings, park dedications, local parades, really boring stuff mostly. The work was tedious, to say the least. Then, about my third weekend, I loaded a tape that only had a faded date on it, October 31st, 81, Halloween. I figured, okay, a Halloween parade. But what came up on the screen was just static, and then a fixed shot of an empty room. It was bland beige walls with a big two-way mirror on one side. The only thing in the room was a single wooden chair in the center. The time code kept ticking, but for 15 minutes, nothing happened. Then a man in a late 70s suit walked in. He moved the chair so it was directly facing the mirror, sat down, and just stared. He didn't move, didn't even seem to blink for the entire rest of the tape, all 45 minutes of it. His eyes were just fixed on his own reflection, or maybe on whoever was supposed to be behind the glass. It was unsettling. I just logged it as some weird psychological study and tried to move on. The next tape from that same batch was worse. Same room, same chair. This time, a woman was already sitting there. She was visibly agitated, whispering super fast at the mirror, her eyes wide with fear. Halfway through the tape, she suddenly stopped whispering. She leaned forward slowly until her face was right up against the lens behind the glass. And then she mouthed 3 words, with this terrifying clarity. "It's in here." And then the tape just cut to black. A cold feeling started to creep into my stomach. This wasn't city council footage. I had no clue what I was watching, but it felt like I'd found a locked door I was never, ever supposed to open. The next night, I tried to stick to the parade tapes, but my mind kept going back to that room, around my 3 a.m. coffee break. I heard this distinct, soft thud coming from directly above me from the main reading room, which was always locked up. It sounded like a heavy book being dropped on a carpet. My heart just about jumped out of my chest. I knew I was alone. The security log at the front door had a key code, and mine was the only one active for the overnight shift. I grabbed my flashlight and headed upstairs, my footsteps echoing in the huge marble foyer. The reading room was dark, musty, and totally empty, just like always. Yes. But as I swung my flashlight beam across the room, it caught something. There, in the dead center of the main reading table, was a single, leather-bound book lying open. It definitely wasn't there when I did my building check at midnight. I didn't touch it. I just backed out, locked the door, and went back to the basement, my nerves completely shot. Trying to get some sense of normalcy back, I loaded another tape, and there it was again. The room. This time it was empty. But about 10 minutes in, a faint dark smudge started to appear in the corner of the two-way mirror. It looked like something was pressing against the glass from the other side, slowly spreading out like a stain. And then I heard something new coming from the little speaker on my monitor, right under the tape hiss. It was a slow, rhythmic scratching. It was the exact same rhythm as the sound of my own pen, which I suddenly realized I'd been tapping nervously on my desk just moments before. The tape wasn't just recording the past. It was mirroring my present. I slammed the eject button, shut everything down, and spent the rest of my shift huddled in the brightly lit lobby. I gave my notice the next day, just saying the solitude was getting to me. The director was understanding. On my last day, as I was doing my final walkthrough, I finally went over and opened that book on the reading room table. It was a city ledger from 1981. On a page for October, short entry noted that a privately funded sensory perception study had been granted short-term use of a municipal building. The location was blacked out, but the principal investigator listed was the same name as the staring man from that first tape. The final note just said, "Project terminated. All materials to be sealed." I never told them what I saw in those tapes. But sometimes, even now, when I'm in my own house and I hear a creak or a strange noise, I freeze. I remember that dark smudge spreading across the glass. I have this nagging, terrible feeling that I wasn't just watching those tapes in the dark. Something in that footage was watching me back, learning the sounds of my presence, and using them to scratch its way out. After graduating with my art history degree, I never imagined my first real job would be as an overnight security guard at the Modern Art Museum. It was the only gig I could land. My post was the Claymore Wing, this new, brutally modern addition. Think sharp angles, cold concrete, and huge shadowy galleries filled with minimalist art. My patrol was a 3-hour loop through these silent, cavernous spaces. The centerpiece of the wing was an installation called The Assembly. It was a group of 12 life-sized, abstract human figures, carved from polished black obsidian and arranged in a loose circle in the central atrium. In the dark, they were just these sleek, man-sized voids absorbing all the light. The number one rule on the overnight shift was absolute silence. No music, no phone calls. This was so you could hear any potential intruder. Of course, that also meant you heard everything else. It started during my second week. I was walking the perimeter of the atrium when I heard a soft, dry, scuffing sound. It was like a shoe dragging on polished concrete, and it came from the direction of the assembly. I whipped around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The figures stood exactly as they always had. I checked my handheld device. The motion sensor logs for the atrium were completely clear. I brushed it off. As the building settling, maybe my own echo. But the sounds didn't stop. They became a nightly thing, faint tap, as if one of the figures had shifted its weight. Sometimes a low, almost inaudible hum seemed to radiate from the circle, but only when my back was turned, and the motion sensors. They never triggered. I started to get this persistent, prickling feeling of being watched from inside that circle of statues. One night I got desperate. I needed to prove I wasn't losing my mind, so I did something completely unprofessional. As I passed each obsidian figure, I placed a tiny, almost invisible piece of clear tape on the floor, right at the base of its plinth, marking its exact position. The next night I approached the assembly with a knot of dread in my stomach. My flashlight found the first piece of tape. The statue was perfectly aligned. Second, third, and fourth were all the same. But when I got to the fifth figure, the tape was gone. In its place, on the concrete floor, was a fresh, faint scuff mark. The obsidian figure hadn't moved much, maybe an inch or two, but it was undeniably out of alignment with its neighbors. Breaking the perfect symmetry of the circle, my blood ran cold. With trembling fingers, I checked the motion sensor log again. Still nothing. I didn't report it. Who would possibly believe me? They'd think I was crazy. On my final night before I was scheduled to rotate to a different wing, I decided I needed proof. Just for myself. I pulled out my phone, making sure the flash was off. The screen lit up the glossy, featureless faces of the figures. I focused on the one that had moved and snapped a picture. The preview image loaded on my screen. I saw my own reflection in the polished obsidian, my face pale and wide-eyed. And behind my reflection, subtly blurred in the stone's dark surface, was the silhouette of another gallery guard, standing on the other side of the circle, watching me. But I was utterly, completely alone. I never took the transfer. I quit the next day. Sometimes, I still look at that photo. The figures are all perfectly in place, just as they should be. But in the dark glass of that fifth statue, the vague silhouette of that other watcher is still there. I realize now that the assembly wasn't the artwork. We were, the silent guards and the shifting statues, performing for each other in the dark forever. And to this day, I still don't know which one of us was truly made of stone. The summer after I graduated high school, I desperately needed a job, something that paid more than minimum wage and didn't require any experience. That's how I found myself working as the overnight cleaner at Neon Dream, this massive retro-themed arcade. My shift was from 1 a.m. to 9 a.m., right after the last of the birthday party crowds had stumbled out. The owner, a no-nonsense guy named Derek, laid out my duties: wipe down the skee-ball lanes, vacuum the ticket-littered carpets, clean the bathrooms, and empty all the trash. There was just one very strict rule. I was never, under any circumstances, to turn on any of the arcade games. He explained that the overhead lights in my cleaning equipment were on a separate circuit. The sea of over 100 game cabinets had to stay dark and silent. They're old, he told me. Leaving them on all night is a fire hazard and a waste. You'll get used to the silence. The first week was eerie, but simple enough. The only light came from my work lamp and the red glow of the exit signs. Huge room, usually bursting with light and sound, felt like a tomb for dead robots. I'd walk down an aisle and see my lamp reflected in the glassy stare of a dozen dark screens. The silence was the worst part. It was this heavy, absorbent quiet where the crunch of a single forgotten token under my shoes sounded like a gunshot. I started wearing headphones, but I always kept one ear out, just in case an actual intruder showed up. That's when I started hearing things. Not the absence of sound, but sounds that shouldn't have been there. A single, faint pop from a pinball machine's speaker. The subtle whir of a racing game's steering wheel shifting an inch all by itself. About a month into the job, I was cleaning near the back corner, where they kept the oldest games, these wood grain cabinets from the late 70s. I sprayed some cleaner on a machine called Cosmic Corsair, and its monitor suddenly flickered to life with a burst of static, casting this sick blue light on my face. I jumped back. It wasn't even plugged in. I could see the power cord coiled up neatly underneath it. The static cleared into a flickering test pattern for a few seconds, and then it just snapped off, leaving behind the smell of hot dust and ozone. I was shaken, so I called Derek the next day. He just sighed, sounding tired. "Yeah, that one's got a capacitor issue. It's on the list for the tech. Just maybe avoid that corner for the rest of the week." But I couldn't avoid it. The very next night, Cosmic Corsair was on again. Pixelated starships drifted silently across the screen. There was no music, no sound effects, just this silent, mesmerizing movement. My heart was pounding as I walked closer. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I had never touched this game. I'd never even played it. As I stood there, frozen, the SAM score began to tick upward, point by point, like an invisible player was expertly navigating a level. I completely lost it. I ran to the breaker panel and killed all the power to the entire building, plunging myself into total darkness, except for the battery-powered exit signs. I spent the rest of the night huddled behind the prize counter, my back pressed against the cold glass, just waiting for the sun to come up. When daylight finally started filtering through the front windows, I turned the power back on. The arcade was dark and quiet again. I forced myself to walk back to Cosmic Corsair. The screen was black, dead. But when I leaned in for a closer look, I saw something etched into the thin layer of dust on the control panel. 2 perfect, clean handprints. They were much smaller than mine. They were child-sized. I quit that morning. Derek wasn't surprised. He said the overnight cleaners never lasted more than a few months. He asked if the silence finally got to me. I didn't tell him about the score or the handprints. I just nodded. Years later, I drove by and saw that Neon Dream had gone out of business. I sometimes wonder if that cabinet was more than just broken. I think something was trapped in there, something that fed on the noise and light of the day and grew lonely in the dark. And during my shifts, it found a way to mimic life, to reach out by stealing my name and leaving its mark. To this day, the sound of a coin dropping in an arcade doesn't excite me. It makes me look over my shoulder, into the dark space behind the screen, and wonder what's looking back.